Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Indeed, it's a great pleasure for me to be here today in the ITRE Committee. Normally, we present most of our reports in the CONT Committee. I see some former colleagues from there today, but for me, personally, it's the first time in the ITRE Committee. So thank you very much for the invitation also to present this very interesting subject, the broadband coverage, which is something that I could imagine touches the life of every one of us, because we all use cell phones, computers, and for that, to have internet access, we need good broadband coverage. So the title of the special report that I will present to you today is the broadband in the member states. Despite progress, not all Europe 2020 targets will be met. And the broadband is the common term used to describe faster internet speeds, which are essential for the digital era. Good internet connections are important not only for European businesses to remain competitive in the global economy, but also more widely for promoting social inclusion. Now, what is the starting point? In the Europe 2020 strategy, we have the digital agenda with three main objectives. In 2010, the EU set the targets for broadband relating to basic broadband, which is up to 30 megabits per second, to ensure that until 2013, all citizens are ensured to have coverage to basic broadband. This is up to 30 megabits per second, as I said. The next objective is by 2020 to provide all Europeans with fast broadband, which is the speed between 30 and 100 megabits per second. And the third objective is, again, by 2020, to ensure that at least 50% of the households take up to ultra-fast broadband, which is, in other words, subscription to speeds that are above 100 megabits per second. So the basic is up to 30, the fast is between 30 and 100, and the ultra-fast is above 100 megabits per second. And to support these objectives, a series of policy and regulatory measures have been implemented. What is the European funding here? It's about 15 billion euros for the period 2014-2020 through a variety of funding sources. We have grants from the European budget. We have 5.6 billion euros in loans from the European Investment Bank. We have also EFSI projects, so different variety of funding. Now, what we focused our audit on, we try to assess the effectiveness of the actions taken by the EU and the member states to achieve these three EU 2020 broadband objectives. And in particular, we wanted to assess whether the member states are likely to achieve these objectives and whether the Commission monitored these achievements. Also, whether the member states had developed appropriate strategies to achieve these objectives. And of course, if they had effectively implemented these strategies, not only to design them, but also to implement them. Our audit covered the current 14-20 period and the previous 7-13 program periods and all EU funding sources, including support provided by the EAP, as I mentioned. In addition, you see from the slide, we visited 5 member states, Ireland, Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Italy, where we had discussions with a range of other key stakeholders. Now, on the next slide, I don't know if it could be seen very well. I will not comment much on it, but it's a snapshot of the situation of fast broadband coverage in the EU as of 2016. And the fast one, as I mentioned in the beginning, between 30 and 100 megabits per second. You can see the more greener areas are where the targets are more likely to be achieved, and the lighter green is where the percentage is lower. So you can see from the map that this is clearly not probably going to be achieved by 2020. Our general conclusion from the overall audit is that, of course, some targets are already met. The first target of basic broadband coverage, up to 30 megabits per second, basically all member states achieved by 2016, although the deadline in the strategy was 2013. That was the strategic objective, but by 2016, more or less everybody had ensured there is coverage for basic broadband. But for the remaining two targets, the fast and ultra-fast, you saw the map for the fast one. For the ultra-fast, the situation is even less promising. And rural areas remain particularly problematic in most member states. By mid-2017, 14 member states had coverage in rural areas of less than 50%. And for the third target, which is take-up or subscription of ultra-fast broadband, only 15% of the households had subscribed to internet connections at this speed by mid-2017 against a target at 50. So 15% was achieved against target of 50%. Despite these problems, if member states' plans are implemented as intended, 3 of these 5 visited member states may be in a good position to achieve the Commission's objectives for 2025, one of which is that all households should have access to ultra-fast broadband upgradable to 1 gigabit per second. A particular aspect of our audit was the Commission's support provided to the member states, and while it was positively assessed by them, we found that the monitoring is uncoordinated across different Commission's DGs. Now, some of the weaknesses that we discovered in the strategies we audited, we observed that all member states have developed such broadband strategies, but in the ones we examined, we found some shortcomings. Some member states were late in finalizing their strategies. Sometimes the targets were not always consistent with those of EU 2020. Actually, none of the member states we visited had put as target the third objective, which I mentioned in the beginning, which was the take-up of ultra-fast, the subscription for the ultra-fast broadband. That was not part of the strategies we analyzed. In addition, not all member states had addressed the challenges related to their legacy internet infrastructure, in other words, their telephone infrastructure, with potential implications for adequate speed in the medium and long term. You know very well there are different solutions that are possible, different infrastructure options, such as, of course, the traditional old model is copper networks, but there is also coaxial cable, there is fiber, there is wireless technologies, so different solutions. And, of course, different potential implications depending on the choice different member states made. Now, what was interesting also to observe is the various limiting factors of the progress to achieve the broadband objectives. The first limiting factor, always and as usual, is related to financing. According to studies done by the Commission, the amount required to achieve the 2020 broadband objectives was estimated to up to 250 billion euros. That was the estimate in 2013. And the EIB also estimated that half of the costs are in rural areas, where 20% of the population lives. Against this background, we found that financing in rural and suburban areas was not properly addressed in 3 of the member states we examined. What we also found was that one major EIB project supported through the EFSI did not indeed focus on those areas where public sector support is most needed. Another important factor identified was the legal and competitive environment, which posed problems in 2 member states, namely Ireland and Germany. Some issues we discovered there. And last but not least, the aspect related to effective coordination between the different funding sources and the long time periods involved. We found that appropriate levels of coordination supported broadband provision and ensured economies of scale in 3 of the 5 member states visited, but in 2 of them, actually, due to different organization of the lender or different and difficult coordination between program periods, this coordination issue played a role in as limiting factor towards progress. Now, of course, as in every report, we have a few recommendations. Based on these findings, we make 8 recommendations to the Commission, grouped in these areas of strategic planning, regulatory environment, and fostering competition, namely geared towards recommending to member states to develop revised plans to meet the new targets. We also recommend that all member states should review the mandates of their national regulatory authorities in accordance with the EU framework in the context of competition and legal environment issues. And this is very much in brief, just in a few slides, what the report is about. But, of course, I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.